Good afternoon and a warm welcome, everyone, to this conversation with Spain's Minister of Economy, Trade and Business, Carlos Cuerpo. Warm welcome, Minister. My name is Jörn Fleck, and I'm the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Europe Center, coming to you on day 3 of the Council's IMF-World Bank Week. This has been a week already, 3 days packed with discussions and programming with leaders from around the world at the crossroads of finance, economics, and geopolitics. And we're particularly excited to be hosting Minister Cuerpo. We should say really welcome back to the minister who has been here at the council for spring meetings this year, as well as last year's annual meetings. And so you're a frequent flyer with us at the council during these busy days, and it's always a treat to have this meaningful dialogue with you about Spain's economic outlook and your perspectives on the global economy, the transatlantic economic relationship, and so much more. On the Spanish economy, many will be aware, of course, the minister has quite the success story to tell, the distinction of Spain as the Eurozone's fastest growing economy forecasted for this year, continuing a trend of outperforming European average growth for a number of years now. The IMF just today increased its 2025 forecast for Spain to 2.9%, exceeding your own recent upgrades. There's obviously the successful use of next-gen EU funds, the attraction of foreign direct investment, and credit rating upgrades, and of course the recent recognition by the Financial Times editorial board of Spain as quote-unquote Europe's standout economy and a rare bright spot amid a challenging outlook for much of the rest of the continent. Spain, of course, is also not immune from the rising external pressures and uncertainties impacting Europe and the global economy, from tariffs and US policy shifts to inflation, non-market economy practices, especially by China, and economic security concerns. And so, as always, we're glad to have Minister Cuerpo back with us today to discuss the way forward for Spain's economic strategy and for sustaining the current momentum in today's increasingly volatile global economy. So, Minister, thank you again for joining us, and over to my colleague Josh Lipsky, the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's GeoEconomics Center, to moderate the conversation. Over to you.
Thank you, Jörn, and thank you and all of the Europe Center for your partnership, not only this week, but throughout our work together at the Atlantic Council. Minister, Madam Ambassador, to the entire delegation, welcome back to the Atlantic Council. We're so pleased to see you.
Of course, it's our pleasure. Actually, you were saying that it's that I have a success story to tell. It's even better to listen to it from others.
It sounded very nice. So, Financial Times Standout Economy of the Year, that happened after you came here in the spring. So if there are other finance ministers listening to these events, I just want them to take the lesson accordingly, that if you come to the Atlantic Council, good things can happen to your economy.
Positive correlation then.
Exactly, deeply connected. So let's talk about the success story. What are the drivers? We've had this meeting before, and continually you come in with good news, with upgrade. I think it's useful to understand what's underneath it, because that also talks about the long-term sustainability of that growth.
Well, of course, I mean, beginning with the facts, with the numbers, I think it's good to remind ourselves it's 2.9% growth foreseen by the IMF for 2025, means 2.5 times or 2.5 times larger growth than the Eurozone. So we'll be still leading for the second year in a row amongst major advanced economies. So that's, I mean, for us, it's a great sign that things are going in the right direction, and that means also that underneath these big numbers is a lot going on in the Spanish economy, and this robust growth actually translates into confidence, into trust, not only from the analysts such as the IMF or others, but also, as I've said, from markets. When you look at the evolution of the stock exchange in Spain, it's another outstanding element. Particularly the financial sector is outstanding this year. When you look also at the way investors are looking and demanding our debt, then that's another sign. You look at the evolution of the spread, which is again at 2007 levels, pre-global financial crisis. 3 times we've had an upgrade for the past 3 weeks from the major rating agencies. So an overall story of trust and confidence in the outlook, not only the past figures, but the forward-looking outlook. So, and then what is driving this success story? I think there are many things, but in a sense, if I can sum it up, it's a balanced growth model which is ensuring sustainability. So it's balanced in the sense that it actually derives from a strong bet on, of course, green transformation, digital, of course, transformation as well. So green transition, digital transformation. Then we are growing with a purpose, which is, of course, thinking about the welfare state, thinking about not leaving anyone behind. And that means, in concrete terms, that the purchasing power of Spaniards has increased in real terms. So basically, they've been able to, with the increase in wages that we've witnessed for the past few years, overcome the inflation shock, of course, and the distribution, it's uneven across the different income deciles, but those who fared better with respect to inflation were the lower income deciles, basically to policies such as the increase in the minimum wage, which was above 60% for the past few years. And then the third element, which closes this virtuous circle, is fiscal responsibility. Thanks also to the next generation EU funds. So we've been able to do this strong investment bet and structural reforms on the back of 80 billion of transfers from the next generation EU funds, and reduce our debt to GDP ratio more than 23 percentage points since the peak as a response to the pandemic, reduce our deficit levels below 3% last year once we removed the impact of the floodings in Valencia as a one-off, and basically reaching, hopefully in 2025, primary surplus, which again, that implies that we will be having a positive snowball effect on debt, not only from growing, but also from being responsible.
Okay, so when you come back in the spring, as I hope you will, then we can check whether the surplus is intact and we'll see the trajectory. Let's talk about some of the headwinds. Unemployment has come down 10%, youth unemployment still high, I think above 20%. We've talked about this before. Do you see progress, and what do you expect over the next 6 months on that front?
So again, we see signs of structural change in the Spanish economy because we managed to get out of COVID without scars, but at the same time, we're modernizing our economy. And I think the labor market is a good way to look at it. And let me just give you maybe 3 examples. So one is, when you look at how fast employment is growing in Spain, you look at the best performing sectors, there are high value added sectors. Of course, ICT, you have pharmaceutical, all sectors which are related to a stronger productivity movement in the Spanish economy, associated with strong job creation as well, which was not the case in previous growth periods. Then another important element is that unemployment rate is still high. You said it's still in the 2-digit area, just above 10%. But it's been going down by 50% since 2018. So it was at 15% unemployment rate, and now it's at 10. And as I said, we're going in the right direction. We're still not where we want to land, but each and every move in this direction is actually sustainable. So it's a structural change. And let me give you a third example why there is a structural, we are under a new regime in our labor market, not only because jobs are more stable, as I said, higher skills required in the new job openings, but also when you look at the dropout rate. You talked about the youth unemployment. The drop, so 10.2, 10.3 is our current unemployment rate, very similar to 2004. If we go back to 2004, the dropout rate was 33%. So 1/3 of our youngsters, they actually went out of school to go mainly to the construction sector. There was a bubble in forming. And today, this dropout rate went down from 33 to 12%, sorry. So that's another, I think, great indicator of the structural change that is going on in the Spanish economy. And of course, it is associated with a higher potential GDP growth.
So when we talk about the Spanish economy, we also have to talk about the euro area economy. The interconnection between the two, because we can tell a positive story about the Spanish economy, but real weakness across the Eurozone. We saw this in some of the IMF projections, either stagnating, slight upgrade, slight downgrading. It's nice that Spain is standing out, but this can basically drag you down depending on some of the other pressures that are building up in the euro area. How do you see that?
Well, I like to see the glass half full always. So to some extent, we've been able to rally these very positive numbers, even in a context of decelerating main partners. So I think what we can expect from our main partners is just somehow better figures going forward and a recovery in their growth figures, including, for example, the case of Germany, which is the main engine in the EU in terms of size. They have a huge investment plan prepared going forward, which should be a tailwind for them and for everybody else. So I think we know what we have to do in terms of EU policies, and also we have the main growth engines in the EU, in the Eurozone, actually really putting up to speed their main policies to be another growth driver, another engine of growth in the Eurozone. Just, you said that Spain was an outlier. I mean, we're 10% of the Eurozone size. And in 2024, we meant 50% of Eurozone growth. That tells you a lot of what's going on in Spain, but also what's going on elsewhere.
I appreciate your optimism. There's two ways to look at that story. Now, the big thing that's changed since we last met in April is on trade. When we sat here together 6 months ago, it was just in the wake of President Trump's announcements on Liberation Day. There was a pause on the tariffs, so much uncertainty about what would happen. Now, of course, we have the EU-US trade deal. I want to get your assessment of the deal and its impact on the Spanish economy.
Well, as I did say back in April, what we wanted from an US-EU deal was further integration. I think we've been very adamant on saying that, of course, obstacles to trade are a worse-off scenario or lose-lose scenario for everyone. So this is not the deal that we would have preferred. But then, of course, this being said, we need to understand, and we do understand that the Trump administration is under a new tariff regime in this Trump 2 administration, and they've been putting higher tariffs for each and every one of the trading partners. So that's where we have to actually understand that the deal that the EU made with the US actually departs from this different context than what we would have thought or expected to some extent. So a reality check on that point. Then also, as we were talking to our firms, companies, one element that they were insistently telling us was that we do not want a trade war. So we do not want an escalation of tariffs. We do not want tit-for-tat measures. We want settlement. We want, to the extent possible, certainty to be able to plan, decision, and go ahead with our investment plans. And that was a very strong message. And then the third message that they told us was that they do not want to disengage from the US. The US is a key market for them. And what they needed from us was to, again, give them certainty and help them navigate this new context. And so in that sense, I think the US-EU deal provides for a drop in uncertainty. The uncertainty has not disappeared, let's be honest, but it has lowered. And also it gives them, I think, a space to be able to get the best out of this new context. Because in relative terms, we are generally better off than other competitors within the US market. So now we have to help them, again, make the best out of this opportunity, if I may.
Well, let me ask you about the certainty question. This is something, I was in Brussels a few weeks ago. We were talking to the Commission. Do you believe the deal will hold as it is for the rest of President Trump's term? Because this, to me, seems to be some of the issue around the deal. There's implementation challenges. Certainty is great, but do you think you'll have it for your businesses in Spain, at least over the next 3 years?
Well, that's, as I said before, one of the key elements that is demanded by firms. So we have to push for it. And at this stage, this means that we have to push for a swift implementation of the agreement on both sides. And if possible, to enlarge it to other sectors. So I'm thinking, for example, about steel and aluminum. So steel is a key sector where we're both facing similar challenges across the Atlantic, mainly, of course, as you know, global overcapacity. So there is scope for an agreement there. And even we're pushing from the Spanish side to have an agreement in extending the list of zero tariff products from the US in products that are key for the US market, where they do not have actually the ability or the capacity in the short run to substitute them, like olive oil, for example, or other products which are key for Spain, like wine. So there is still work ongoing, but I'd say that we need to work on extending the agreement rather than changing what we achieved.
So you mentioned overcapacity, so I have to bring up China. I want to talk about what's happened between the US and China just over the past week, rare earths, how you see that tension playing out for an economy like Spain, and then more broadly, where you see Spain's relationship economically with China going forward.
Well, I think we have to depart from, so it's a good transition to some extent. The US is our main trading partner, is a strategic ally, and we need to do all that is in our power to strengthen that relationship. I always call it a treasure that we need to protect. But this being said, the EU needs to be a strong player at any negotiating table. That means engaging with all relevant actors. So the EU needs to, of course, engage with Chinese authorities, and we need to be also practical. Practical in the sense that when you look at certain sectors, we have a technological gap with respect to China. And how to best close that gap, one way to go about it is to actually have investments coming in Europe that will produce this technological transfer and create value added in Europe. And
investments from China to Europe.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, always within this economic security umbrella, which is another shared feature with the US. So there is scope to strengthen, I think, both elements, always with a practical view. I think in that sense, there's a clear message that I'm trying to transmit this week every time I can, that Europe needs to be open for business. We need to be open for partners, trading partners, of course, but we will not be naive. We will work our way through this. We know that we're not in a cooperative game anymore. So that has changed. And thus, we have to strengthen our hand. And that means, of course, reducing dependencies. That means strengthening strategic autonomy. That means looking for new partners, like Mercosur, for example, which is key for Spain.
So I was going to ask about other trade deals outside of
Yes, and that means also, just as a final point there, really digging into the potential of the single market in Europe. There, Spain is also pushing for specific projects to be able to go ahead with the Draghi and the Letta agenda. We've created what we call the Competitiveness Lab, which is like a sandbox where a coalition of the willing countries can actually go ahead and implement integration processes within the single market or the savings and investment union. And we can have other countries chipping in at any time.
One year I want to have you here and we're going to say the single market has been agreed to. That's what I look forward to that day. I know we all look forward to that moment. On Mercosur, just because you brought it up, you think this is going to go through? I know there's tensions within the EU on it, but what's your prognostication?
I've been very optimistic about Mercosur, and I really think that we will be able to ratify the agreement before the end of the year. There is an important meeting in Brazil, beginning of December, and hopefully everything can be settled by then, because it will send, I think, a very positive message. I think threefold. So one is that, again, Europe is walking the talk. So we're saying that we're open to partnering with strategic allies, and we're doing it with Mercosur. Then that would mean, of course, reducing our dependencies or diversifying our sources of dependencies on many of the key assets. And we're talking about rare earths as one key element. And third, because our firms will be benefiting from it, be it in the primary sector, be it industrial firms as well, or even services. So again, there is a lot to gain for everyone on the Mercosur deal.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. I want to get to audience questions in the room and also online, used to Ask AC, but I have a few more of my own while everyone gets ready for theirs. Let's talk about what happened this week between President Trump and Spain. I think the administration has made no secret of their frustration about Spain's defense spending commitments, and yesterday brought the threat of tariffs on Spain if these commitments, at least at the level the US wants to see them, aren't met. How do you take the threat?
Well, you know, I'd like to begin with the Spain's commitments on spending and investment in defense and security. I met with Secretary Bessent at the beginning of the year, and we had a talk about defense and security spending. And at that point, I told him that Spain was very committed to increase our efforts on that front, And just a few weeks later, President Sanchez did present our new investment plan on defense, which meant that we would reach 2% of GDP by the end of 2025, bringing that target 4 years forward because it was foreseen for 2029. So basically, we would have gone from barely 1% of GDP when we came into government in our first term in 2018 to 2%, doubling the share of GDP in barely 7 years. So strong effort, increase of 40% in 2025. So that's part of the commitment, understanding that we needed to step up on that front. And then when it comes to NATO, and that's part of the same story, Spain, of course, within NATO, will be a faithful ally, and we will be covering for the capabilities that are assigned to Spain. You know how this exercise is done. Beginning of June, NATO actually updates the threats that we might be facing. And once you have updated the threats, you look at the capabilities that you have to face those threats and the new capabilities that you need to develop. And the cost to go there where you want to be is actually split amongst the different allies. And each and every one has to go through their own fair share. And Spain will do, of course, its own, we will make good on our commitments, and we will cover our part of the defense of the capabilities against those threats that were identified. And then our estimation is that covering for those capabilities will amount to 2.1% of GDP. So to me, the percentage of GDP is just the end point of the game. But what we will be ensuring is that Spain will be a good and faithful partner within NATO. And then, of course, the decision of how far I want to go, but with a necessary condition, which is covering for my commitments, you can go further than that, but that's a sovereign decision. That's what we are saying. And within the realm of the sovereign decision, Spain has decided that we will stay at 2.1%.
So the tariff threat doesn't move you at all from that position?
Well, again, I think there is an important element here, which is to explain that we're making good on our commitments, that we're a reliable ally within NATO, we're stepping up our defense and security efforts, and then on trade, we will be doing our utmost to further advance relationships with the US, to make good on our agreement between the EU and the US. And I told Secretary Bessent and Ambassador Greer, who were in Madrid barely a month ago, I told them that what I just told you, that our firms want to further engage in the US market, and we wanted to help them further invest and further trade with the US. And for that purpose, we will be opening a trade office in Houston, Texas in the next few months. Again, that's where we're going. That's where we want also this relationship to go.
Okay. Thank you. I want to talk about digital assets for a few minutes before I turn to the audience. Your colleague from Italy, Italy's finance minister, said something very interesting at the last meetings, at the spring meetings. I haven't forgotten it since. He said that the greatest threat to Europe's economy is not from trade wars, which were just blooming at that point, but from stablecoins, dollar-backed stablecoins. A lot's changed in 6 months. We have the Genius Act here in the United States, putting a regulatory framework around stablecoins. But what is your view of dollar-backed stablecoins, not just for the Eurozone, but what it means globally, especially in emerging markets, where I think you would see a lot of interest and adoption and a faster, cheaper way to access the dollar?
Well, we've just been talking about dependencies, and of course, the financial sector is a key area when we want to develop strategic autonomy in Europe. So let me concentrate first on the EU angle. So from that point of view, again, that's another area where we've been working here very closely with the ECB, with the European Central Bank, to be able to develop our own solutions. And in our case, the bet is first and foremost clearly for a digital central bank digital currency, for the digital euro, which is making very good progress. And actually, I hope that by the end of the year, still within Danish presidency of the European Council, we will be able to come to an agreement within the Council on the legislative text. So that would be a key stepping point towards having, as soon as possible, really the digital euro in our pockets, if I may say, in our digital pockets or wallets. So that's just one way for us to enter in this race of developing our own digital solutions for payments, amongst others. But it's not just retail, it's also wholesale. There's a lot of, so the race is ongoing on many levels and many layers. And as I said, digital euro is the first bet, but we've also, and I think from the euro perspective, we will be, of course, supporting private sector-led initiatives within the realm of the existing regulation in the EU, which is protecting, of course, consumers, which is protecting our data, amongst other things. It will be fostering innovation to the extent possible, again, to have EU-based digital solutions, not only public ones like the digital euro, but also private ones.
On the digital euro...
It's part, sorry if you allow me,
please.
It's part also of the discussion on reinforcing the international role of the euro, because you rightly pointed out that these are dollar-backed digital money.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about the euro, because the question to me is less about technology. You can put digital euro and permission blockchain, we can figure out how the digital euro is built. But is it about the technology, or is it about the demand for dollars globally? And therefore, even the euro, obviously within the Eurozone, will be used in this new way. But globally, as an asset, what these dollar-backed stablecoins could mean.
You know, what we've been witnessing when you look at the exchange rate evolution over the past few months, from the euro perspective, is somehow getting the cost of having a strong currency or somehow reserve-based currency, which with a huge appreciation of the euro with respect to the dollar, but also with respect to other currencies, without any of the real benefits of it. So no benefit in terms, for example, of reduction of our financing costs, and no benefits of increase, for example, in the number of transactions that are euro-based. So again, I think that's the angle where we should actually look at this discussion. We have to reinforce the use of the euro, and reinforcing the use of the euro has many layers to it. One is, for example, making the euro the currency, for example, of green or climate transactions. That would be one way to go, but there are many other layers to it. Another one would be to be able to deepen the supply of euro-denominated debt as well, but that's another discussion.
Well, that's an important discussion. So, okay, we can talk more about that, but let me first turn to the audience. Any questions in the room, please raise your hand, and we'll get to everyone if we can. If not, I'll go online. Okay, while people think about their questions, let me ask one I have here about energy. We had the Iberian blackout. I want to talk about energy infrastructure investment in Spain, what you see happening, and I also want to ask your opinion on LNG, port terminals, and where you see construction happening on the energy front in Spain.
Well, beginning with the LNG port terminals, you know, Spain is a hub. We have 6 LNG port terminals, so it's really an entry point for the rest of the European Union. And there, the need for additional investment actually is or comes with interconnections. So that's where we're trying to push. Of course, energy interconnection is an EU public good where we have to increase investments in the course of the next few years. And that's one of the main lines of reasoning and push from the Spanish government also. And I hope that this will be one of the main investment areas within the next medium-term financial framework, also in the European Union. And then you asked about investments in Spain. And nowadays, what we just presented it a few weeks ago. So we will be increasing our investment on the grid, on the transmission by 14 billion to be able to provide for the increased demand that is coming from new clients, particularly from the industry. So basically there's a strong success in terms of attracting new investment projects, and we want to be able to deliver for the plug-in of every one of those projects.
And timeline for this, you think?
Well, this is actually 2025 to 2030 timeline.
So, a question here about trade, and I'll frame it this way. You know, this is about the US-EU deal, but I want to ask you a question we've been talking to ministers about on the US-EU deal, which is that deal may make sense in the context as you laid out and others have laid out, given the relative terms and negotiation. But what does it mean for the future of multilateral trade negotiations in an increasingly bilateral trade world, at least as the US in this administration seems to see it?
Well, that means bad news. That means a clear deviation from the rules-based multilateral framework that we had in place. And to the extent possible, we should come back to it, because that's the only way that the system can be to the benefit of everyone, not just the big players that are around the table. And I think we owe that to particularly the emerging world. So it's and this is also part of the discussions this week. So we have to keep on defending this global safety net that the multilateral order means for everyone. And again, this is another clear political line from the Spanish government. For example, we're doubling our bet on financing for development. We had in July the fourth international meeting on financing for development, the conference. And I think there was a clear sign that Spain is still backing this financing for development agenda with also clear bets, not only in terms of increasing our financing or the use of our SDRs for this agenda, but also putting together new instruments such as the Debt Pause Clause Alliance, in a way that in new contracts new debt contracts with particularly developing countries, we can instill those debt pause clauses that will be triggered by special events, including famine events, including, of course, adverse climate shocks or pandemics or others, so that it can provide for a quick relief, liquidity relief that can make those countries avoid liquidity issues turning into solvency problems just for having to deal with a specific crisis. And then, we, for example, pushing also for the debt swap hub, which is a hub that we've co-created with the World Bank and 20 other partners, where we will be working on technical capacity and collaboration with the developing countries to be able to set up those swaps of debt for example, climate investment. So we're working on reducing the debt burden, on helping those countries decarbonize, so trying to make this a really global agenda. And again, we should not forget about these elements within the realm of bilateral trade agreements or as I said before, a non-cooperative game setup.
I think that's an excellent agenda, and the U.S., of course, hosts the G20 presidency next year, and I think there's certain items of that we can take back. We at the Atlantic Council lead the T20, the think tank 20, which works with the administration on the G20, and what you outlined there seemed like the right things to try to take up under the U.S. presidency, but not always easy given some of the other headwinds around. I want to get to one or two online questions before we wrap. Spain has a strong economic relationship with China, including talks of BYD plan and increasing investment, but Spain's also affected by the rare earth mineral export controls. You've previously referred to as, I think this was an event with Semaphore today, as a lose-lose scenario. How does this impact the cooperation? And when you talk to Chinese counterparts, how do you talk about these vulnerabilities and how some of them are being weaponized?
Well, I think the same reasoning applies to the US tariffs. To some extent, we are putting more fragmentation into the system, and this is a lose-lose scenario for everyone. And we're pretty concerned about those export controls because of the potential impact that they can have on key sectors. Of course, we're talking about the technological sector mainly, but also the EV sector, which is another key area, for example, for Spain. So that's, again, a cause for concern, and we'll be following very closely the actual implementation, if there is in the end of this measure by the Chinese authorities, because it will have a potentially strong impact also on Spain. So again, I think this is the mindset is exactly the same. We'd rather have, of course, an easy way forward in terms of fostering cooperation, of fostering integration, understanding that there are security concerns, that there is a strategic autonomy drive in most of our countries, but even within that context, I think we should strive for really deepening our ties and not just putting barriers to them.
Thank you. Final question from me before we let you go on with your busy schedule this week. You were here 6 months ago in the wake of all the disruption over trade. There was a lot of concern in Washington at the moment about future of international economic system, future of the IMF, future of the World Bank. How do you see things now, 6 months later?
Well, I think there is less concern about the system or the institutions themselves, but I think the discussion now has to be around what we want the institutions for, and what the main agenda items for those institutions for the future will be, and what those institutions should be working for, and who they should be working for. And this is why, from our point of view, we should not forget that within the shareholders, there are some of them that are really in dire need of those institutions doing their work and working for them, particularly developing world, low but also middle-income countries, which will have pressing needs over the course of the next years, and we have to really respond to that challenge. So the institutions will be whatever we want them to be. So that's a huge responsibility that we need to take into account and that we need to factor in when dealing with how we have our own positions within these institutions and how we help them help us, actually.
Ultimately, the institutions reflect the will of the membership.
Indeed.
At the end of the day. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your time, your candor, your commitment to coming back here. We appreciate it. We know how busy your schedule is.
I'm a platinum member now.
Yeah, all sorts of benefits confer, including continued upgrades to the WIA when you come back to the Atlantic Council.
Like that.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. Thank you for joining us online. At 3:30, we will reconvene here. We have Argentina's economy minister and president of their central bank for a conversation about the state of Argentina's economy. So please join us for that. In the meantime, please join me in thanking Minister Cuerpo for his time. Congratulations. We wish you the best of luck this week.
Thank you. Thank you.